He thought she loved him, but she loved the land instead. So he gave her what she wanted, until it vanished under her feet. This is what really happened, and this is his story. Subscribe to Quiet Rancher Stories and hit like so this tale of justice can find someone who needs it. My name is Will Harlan. I'm 52 years old, and most days, I woke up before the sun even thought about making an appearance. The first thing I did, every single morning, was pull on my boots, heavy and worn, then step out onto the porch. It wasn't much of a porch, just 2 planks and a rail, but it gave me a good view. From there, I could see the 60-acre pasture stretching out, green now with the recent rains, a patchwork of mesquite trees scattered across it like old men debating. Beyond that, the rest of the 600 acres rolled out, all mine, or what was left of it, under the big Texas sky. This land, it wasn't just dirt and grass to me, it was Harlan land. Had been since my great-grandpa staked his claim with a handshake and a rifle. It was blood and sweat, sure, but it was also a quiet kind of promise. A promise that you worked hard, you lived simple, and you didn't ask for much. People in the county knew that about me. They'd say, Will Harlan, he's solid as bedrock, and they meant it. I didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't cause any trouble, just ran my cattle, fixed my fences, and kept to myself. It had been 10 years since Sarah, my wife, passed. 10 years since the house felt truly warm, since there was another voice cutting through the rustle of the wind. I didn't go to town much after that, not unless I needed feed or a part for the tractor. Socializing felt like wearing boots too tight. My days were long, filled with the hum of the tractor engine, the lowing of the cows, and the endless work of keeping a ranch afloat. The quiet had become a habit, a comfortable old coat I wore everywhere. Sometimes, looking out at the land at sunrise, I'd think about Sarah and how much she loved this place too. How she'd loved the wildflowers, the way the light hit the old oak by the creek. Then I'd tell myself to get moving. There was always another fence post to check, another trough to fill. The land didn't wait for your feelings, it just waited for your work. And I gave it that. Every single day, the sun would creep higher, painting the clouds orange and pink, and I'd be halfway to the south pasture, the dust already settling behind my truck. It was a good life, I told myself, a quiet one, just the way it ought to be. The first time I saw Clara Dawson, she was standing by the old oak in front of the general store, looking a little out of place, like a polished spoon in a drawer full of tarnished ones. She was mid-30s, I figured, with bright clothes and hair that seemed to catch the sunlight just right. There weren't many new faces in Redemption, Texas, and certainly none that looked quite like her. The women in town usually wore jeans and boots, but Clara had on a flowing skirt and a silk scarf. Even in the dusty heat, she said she was from the city, somewhere up north, starting over, escaping a bad past, she called it. Vague as a fog bank. Folks around the store, they'd try to pin her down, ask her about her old life. She'd just smile, a slow, easy kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and change the subject. It wasn't long before she was the center of attention. Men would stand a little straighter when she walked by, and their wives, well, they'd watch her with a different kind of interest. A cautious kind. I didn't pay her much mind at first. I was in town for fence wire, had my list ready. But then she started coming into the feed store when I was there, asking Jimmy about hay prices, or the best brand of work gloves. Small talk, the kind of things folks around here did every day. Except with her, it felt different. She had a way of looking at you, like she was really listening, like your words held some secret meaning. One afternoon, she walked right up to me, past a few younger men who were practically tripping over their feet, and asked about the drought. "Is it always this dry, Mr. Harlan?" she asked, her voice soft. I mumbled something about the unpredictable weather, about waiting for the fall rains. She nodded, then shifted her gaze past me, out the open door, towards the low hills that held my land. She looked at them for a long moment, a peculiar expression on her face, before turning back to me with that same easy smile. It was flattering, I suppose, to have a woman like that pick you out of a crowd, but a small part of me, the part that had seen a lot of things come and go in life, held back. There was something about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, that felt too smooth, too perfect for the rough edges of this town. Too shiny. Clara started showing up at the ranch. Not every day, but enough that I began expecting her. She'd always have an excuse, wanting to see the horses, or asking if I needed help with anything. Modernizing was a word she used often, though I wasn't sure what she meant by it. I had been working on this place the same way my daddy and his daddy had, and it seemed to me like it was working out just fine. Still, she'd walk the fence lines with me, pointing at things, asking questions. She didn't know much about cattle or the land. Not really, but she listened, and she laughed. I hadn't laughed much since Sarah passed. Not a real laugh anyway. Maybe a chuckle at something Bo Merton said, but nothing that made my chest feel light. Clara, she had this way of finding the humor in things. One afternoon, a calf got tangled in a rope, and I was wrestling with it, feeling like a fool. She just leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching me with a grin that spread from ear to ear. When I finally freed the calf, red-faced and dusty, she clapped, a soft, quick sound. "Mr. Harlan, you're a natural cowboy," she said, and I found myself laughing, a deep, rumbling sound I hadn't heard in years. It felt good, a little rusty, but good. We started riding together, just short loops around the lower pastures. She didn't look comfortable on a horse at first, stiff in the saddle, but she tried. She never complained. In the evenings, sometimes she'd stay for supper. We'd sit out on the porch, a fire crackling in the pit, the stars spread out like spilled diamonds. She'd tell stories about the city, about strange jobs and even stranger people. I'd tell her about the ranch, about the history of the land, the years of hard work. She'd lean in, her eyes wide, and say, "It's such a beautiful piece of land. Will, so much potential." She'd say it again and again, almost like a mantra. I just figured she meant it was a pretty place. I thought she was interested in the life, the quiet of it. I thought she was interested in me. I was wrong. Of course, I just didn't know it yet. She always seemed to praise the land more than the man. I should have noticed that. The murmurs started quiet, like the rustle of dry leaves, then grew louder. I heard them in the feed store, at the post office, even at the old diner where I sometimes grabbed coffee. "She's too pretty for him," someone would whisper. "She's after the deed. Mark my words." It got to where I couldn't walk into town without feeling eyes on my back. Could almost hear the hushed conversations stop as I passed. I'd just nod, grab my supplies, and get out, pretending I didn't notice. Bo Merton, my oldest friend. He didn't whisper. He laid it out plain. He pulled me aside one Tuesday morning, right there in the feed store, near the sacks of sweet feed. His face was creased with worry, lines deeper than usual. "Will," he said, his voice low, "Clara's been asking around, about inheritance laws, about what happens to a man's property if he, passes on." He didn't look at me when he said it, just kicked at a stray piece of straw on the floor. I felt a prickle, a cold spot in my gut, but I pushed it down. "Bo, she's different," I told him, trying to sound firm, like I had it all figured out. "She's just trying to understand things, being new to the country life." He grunted, shook his head, but didn't argue. He knew me well enough to know when I had my mind set. A few days later, Clara was with me at the post office. I was sending off a package, and she was looking through the flyer rack. An old woman, Martha, who ran the counter, was talking to another woman, her voice low. As Clara turned, I saw Martha quickly glance at her, then look away. Clara's smile tightened just a fraction. "They're just jealous, aren't they?" she said later, as we drove back to the ranch. "They see a woman like me, trying to make a life, and they just can't stand it." She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. I nodded, looking straight ahead at the road. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me, the part that had listened to Bo, just watched the dust kick up behind the tires. The thought that she might be after something kept trying to push its way through, but I kept pushing it back down. I liked having her around. The quiet had been too long, too loud, if that makes sense. It was Clara who brought up the idea of marriage. "I need to feel secure, Will," she said one evening, after a long day of riding. We were sitting on the porch swing, the air cooling around us. "This life, it's all so new, a big step, and I want to know I'm truly part of it. Part of your asterisk life." She put her hand on my arm, light as a feather. I didn't see a ring there, but I knew what she meant. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I saw something in them that looked like genuine worry, or maybe it was just a reflection of the firelight. I hadn't really thought about it. Marriage, that is. Not since Sarah. The idea of it felt too big, too important for the quiet life I had built. But then I looked at Clara, at the way she looked at me, and I thought about the laughter she had brought back into my days. The way she filled the empty spaces in the house. Maybe it was time. Maybe she was right. We went to the courthouse in the next county over. Clara insisted on it, just to keep things private. "Darling," she'd said, "no need for a big fuss, not with all those prying eyes in redemption." I agreed. A quiet wedding felt right to me anyway. No fuss, no fanfare, just me and her, and the judge. We didn't even have witnesses, just the clerk who signed the papers. It was quick, a few words, a simple exchange of vows. Her hand felt small in mine. I thought about the weight of those vows, the promise of forever. She smiled, a radiant, almost triumphant smile, when the judge pronounced us husband and wife. We drove back to the ranch that afternoon, the late sun casting long shadows across the fields. The air felt different, heavy with a new kind of silence. The dust on the truck seemed thicker. As soon as we stepped inside the house, Clara went straight to the living room. She moved a lamp, then a framed photo of Sarah and me on the mantelpiece, sliding it behind another, older picture. "Just tidying up," she said, not looking at me. It was a small thing, hardly noticeable, but it was the first real change she made. And then the next day, she started on the curtains. After that, it felt like a dam had broken. The changes kept coming, one after another, pushing the old life further and further into the corners. It started small, but it never really stopped. The house began to transform, little by little, then all at once. My father's old leather armchair, the one I always sat in to read the paper, was replaced with something Clara called a chaise lounge, all velvet and fussy. The walls, which had been a comfortable, worn-off white, were painted a pale blue. Expensive rugs appeared, soft underfoot, where before there had only been bare wood and the occasional throw rug that Sarah had crocheted. It was a city house, or what Clara thought a city house should be, plunked down in the middle of a working ranch. Then came the ranch itself. She fired two of my longest-serving ranch hands, Old Man Tucker and young Billy. "They're lazy, Will," she'd said, her voice sharp, dismissive. "We need fresh blood, efficiency." Old Man Tucker had been with the Harlan family for 40 years, knew every rock and dip on this land better than I did. Billy was just starting out, learning the ropes, a good kid. I stood there, watching them pack their things, their faces tight. It felt wrong. I tried to argue, but Clara just waved her hand. "I'm the lady of this land now, darling," she said. "We'll do things my way." She started hosting garden parties. Women from town, mostly the younger ones, dressed up in hats and light dresses, sipping iced tea on the porch. The kind of parties Sarah would have laughed at, quietly. Clara bought expensive things for these gatherings, charging them to my account at the general store, at the feed store. The storekeepers looked at me with raised eyebrows when I came in to settle up. My bill was higher than it had ever been. I started seeing her signature everywhere, on letters to suppliers, on invoices, even on a new sign she ordered for the gate, though she never put it up. "Clara Harlan, ranch proprietor," it would read, a fancy script that twisted and curled. She was taking over, piece by piece, like kudzu vines creeping up a wall. I watched, I heard, I felt the shift. I walked through the house, through the pastures, and it felt less and less like mine. I kept my face plain, my voice even, but inside, something was hardening. The quiet observation wasn't just a habit anymore. It was a plan. One afternoon, I left the ranch ledger open on the kitchen table. It was an old, leather-bound book, its pages filled with my neat, careful numbers, charting every expense, every sale, every drop of feed. Only this time, the numbers were all wrong. I had spent a few hours with a red pen, adding zeros, shifting decimals, creating a web of overdue debts and crushing expenses. The land taxes were astronomical, the cattle sales non-existent, and there were even a few fictional legal fees for a land dispute that didn't exist. It looked like a ranch bleeding money, every page stained with red ink. Clara found it, just like I knew she would. I was out in the barn, pretending to fix a loose hinge, when I heard her gasp from the house, a sharp, high sound, like a bird caught in a trap. She came storming out, the ledger clutched in her hand like a dead snake. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, the polish gone. "Will, what is this?" she practically shrieked, a far cry from her usual soft voice. "You didn't say we were going broke. You said this was a solid business." I turned, slow, like I was surprised to see her. "Going broke?" I said, my voice low, tired. "Clara, this drought, the market. I thought you knew. I've been trying to make it work, but the taxes alone, it's been a losing battle for years." I sighed, running a hand through my hair, making sure to look defeated. I talked about unexpected legal trouble, a sudden surge in feed costs, a downturn in cattle prices that no one could have foreseen. It was a convincing performance, I thought. I even coughed a little, for effect. She just stared at the red numbers, her lip trembling. The warmth, the charming smile. It just seemed to melt away, replaced by something cold and calculating. We'll figure it out. Will, she said. But her voice lacked any real conviction. It was thin, like tissue paper. She stood there for a long moment, the ledger still clutched. Her shoulders slumped. She looked less like the lady of the land now, and more like a woman who had just had her hopes snatched away. I watched her walk back to the house, the leather book still in her hands, her steps heavy. The silence that followed her was loud, full of unspoken questions. I just turned back to my hinge, a small smile playing on my lips. The trap was set. The shift in Clara was like the turning of the seasons, sudden and unmistakable. The laughter died, replaced by a quiet, simmering anger that she tried, and failed, to hide. Her hand no longer sought mine when we walked. No casual brush of her fingers against my arm. The easy smiles were gone too, replaced by a tight line of her lips. She began sleeping in the guest room, claiming she needed her own space, that I snored too loud. I didn't snore, I knew that. She stopped coming out to the pastures with me. The rides ceased. She no longer asked about the cattle or the fences. Instead, her mornings were spent on the phone. Her voice hushed, then sharp, then hushed again. She started spending more time in town, telling me she was looking for investment partners. I'd just nod, pretending to believe it, watching her drive off in the old pickup. The dust she left behind felt heavier than usual. I kept up my act, the struggling rancher, the man losing his grip. I'd sigh loud, talk about the price of hay, kick at the dirt around the water pump. She'd barely look up from her phone. She was always holding it now, pressed to her ear, or scrolling through something. Her eyes, which had once seemed so interested, now held a distant, preoccupied look. It was like she was already somewhere else, making plans that didn't include me. I never mentioned her absences, never asked about her partners. I just watched the way she avoided my gaze, the way her shoulders stiffened when I entered a room. One afternoon, Beau Merton called me. He kept his voice low, almost a whisper. "Will," he said, "I saw Clara in town today. She was at the bank, over by the loan officer's desk, and she wasn't alone. Some fancy lawyer from Dallas, I think, heard them talking about property deeds." He paused, waiting for me to say something. I just thanked him, told him the weather was looking good for a change. He hung up, probably shaking his head. I put the phone back on the hook. So, she was looking for a way out. Or, more accurately, a way in. I just leaned against the wall, listening to the quiet of the house, and waited. The next step was hers. I took to following her, discreetly. Of course, I knew every back road, every dust track in the county. It was easy enough to keep my distance, to blend into the landscape, like a shadow moving across the fields. One morning, she drove the pickup into Redemption, parked it near the bank. I waited. She went inside, then came out a few minutes later. Not alone. The man with her was sharp, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for Texas. Even for the city folks. A land attorney, Beau had said. I watched them from my truck, parked a few blocks down, hidden behind the feed store. They walked to a small cafe, sat at a table by the window. I couldn't hear their words, not clearly, but I could see their gestures, the way they leaned in. I saw Clara pull out a stack of papers, slide them across the table. The lawyer looked them over, nodded, then began talking, his hands moving to emphasize his points. I watched Clara's face, eager, almost predatory. Later that afternoon, after they had parted ways, I made a few discreet calls of my own. Nothing direct, just talking to an old friend in the county clerk's office, a few well-placed questions. What I learned, it set my teeth on edge. She hadn't just been asking about inheritance laws. She had been asking about how to get sole ownership of a property if a spouse died. And worse, she had already been trying to forge my name on asset transfer drafts, using my old signature from documents she must have found in my desk. Little things, small attempts to move funds, to change ownership on minor things, test the waters. They hadn't gone through. Of course, I had already taken care of that, months ago. I drove back to the ranch, the familiar bumps of the road doing little to smooth the cold knot in my stomach. So, that was it. She wasn't just planning to leave if things got bad. She was planning to take everything, to leave me with nothing, or worse. I pulled the truck into the barn, the dust settling around me. I didn't say anything to her that night. I didn't even look at her when she came back. Hours later, humming a small, tuneless song, I just watched her move through the house, a ghost in my own home, and waited. The game had begun, and she didn't even know it. Not yet. The next stage of the plan involved paper. I had a long, detailed letter drafted, full of legalese and official-sounding terms. It spoke of impending bankruptcy, of foreclosures, of the bank breathing down my neck. It mentioned a trust that was about to be dissolved, assets frozen, the land itself in peril. I made sure to mention the ranch, the acres, the specific problems that would make it unsellable, worthless. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a web of lies designed to look like the cold, hard truth. I left it on the kitchen counter, half hidden beneath a stack of old bills. I went out to check the fences on the North 40, making sure I was gone long enough for her to find it, to read every damning word. When I came back, the letter was gone, tucked away somewhere. I figured Clara was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, but her face was pale, and her fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the glossy page. She didn't look at me. That night, she didn't come home, not for dinner, not by dark. The truck was gone too. I didn't call. I didn't send out a search party. I just watched the road, the moonlight on the empty drive. The house felt quiet again, but this time, it was a familiar quiet, a welcome one. I went to work making the ranch feel like it was collapsing. I turned off the heat in the evenings, claiming we couldn't afford the propane. I fired the cook I hadn't had in years, making a big show of it to no one in particular. I stopped ordering supplies, let the pantry get bare. I started talking to myself, loud enough for her to hear when she was around, about the crushing debt, about packing up, about the end of the Harlan line. She didn't protest. She didn't offer solutions. She just became absent, a shadow drifting through the house, leaving only a faint scent of her perfume behind. Her phone calls grew more frequent, more desperate. I'd hear her pacing, her voice low and frantic. I knew what she was doing. She was talking to her lawyer, trying to find a way to get her share before the whole thing went under, and I just let her. The more desperate she sounded, the more convinced she would be. The trap was almost sprung. The morning she left, the sun was just nudging over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in soft pale yellows. I was out on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee, the usual quiet of the ranch settling around me. I saw it immediately. Her truck was gone, parked where it usually was, but empty. A quick glance inside the house confirmed it. Her small suitcase was missing from the guest room, along with a few trinkets she'd brought with her. A silver comb, a small music box. On the kitchen table, under a chipped coffee mug, was a short note. Her handwriting was elegant, loops and flourishes, but the words themselves were clipped, almost dismissive. This life wasn't what I thought. It read, I can't do this anymore. No goodbye, no explanation, just a period at the end of the sentence. I folded it once, then twice, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. It was a neat, clean break, just like I had hoped. I walked out to the edge of the property, to the ridge that overlooked the main road. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth. I saw her then, a small figure in the distance, riding away from the ranch on her bay mare, the one I'd given her months ago. She carried a small saddlebag, probably stuffed with what cash she had, and whatever other valuables she could carry. She didn't look back. She just kept riding, smaller and smaller, until she was just a speck on the horizon, then gone. I didn't stop her. I didn't call out. There was no reason to. She was getting exactly what she thought she wanted, a clean escape from a sinking ship. She thought she was leaving me broken, bankrupt, buried under debt and the weight of a dying ranch. She thought she was cutting her losses, and I let her believe it. Every step of the way, I just stood there on the ridge, the sun warming my face, and watched her go. The quiet returned, a deeper, more peaceful quiet than it had been in a long time. The house felt lighter already, the air felt cleaner. I took a deep breath, the dust of her departure settling, and turned back to the ranch. There was work to be done. I heard about it piecemeal at first, then in full, hushed detail, like a story whispered from one end of town to the other. Clara, it seemed, had ridden straight into a wall. She tried to cash in what she thought were joint assets, things she believed she had a claim to. She'd walked into the bank, probably with that same confident, polished smile she wore for strangers, ready to pull out her share of the collapsing fortune. Only, there wasn't any share. The bank manager, old Mr. Jenkins, who had known my family for generations, apparently just looked at her, then shook his head. Ma'am, he'd said, Mrs. Harlan, your name isn't on anything. Mr. Harlan placed all his assets, the ranch, the accounts, everything, into a generational holding company before your wedding. He'd probably leaned back in his chair, a slow, knowing look on his face. Protected it all in trust, he did. You see, the land, it's not owned by Will Harlan the man anymore. It's owned by the Harlan Ranch Trust. And that trust, Well, it's been set up to ensure the land stays in the family name, no matter what. She must have stood there, her face draining of colour, the full weight of it hitting her. The land she had so carefully praised, the acres she had tried to claim as her own, were utterly, irrevocably beyond her grasp. She got nothing, not a single penny from the sale of a single steer, not a fraction of the value of the dirt beneath her feet. She had married the man, but she hadn't married the land. She had no claim to it, no legal right to anything she had imagined inheriting. She tried going to her fancy lawyer, the one from Dallas. I heard he gave her the same news, perhaps with a touch more legal jargon, but the meaning was plain. She had been outsmarted. She came back to redemption, defeated, her polished look gone, replaced by something haggard. She tried to beg the bank for a loan, for anything. They just shook their heads. There was nothing to give, and she had no collateral. The town watched, quietly, as she realized she truly had nowhere left to land. After Clara left, after the dust had settled around her final, furious attempts to claim what wasn't hers, I decided it was time to step back into the light. I shaved the stubble I'd let grow for weeks, trimmed my hair, and pulled out my father's old Sunday coat, a good tweed that still fit well. It wasn't a defiant act, not really, more like putting things back in order. I drove into redemption on a Tuesday, the same day the bank usually got busy. I walked in, nodding to Mr. Jenkins, who watched me with a glint in his eye. Then, slowly, deliberately, I settled every single debt I had accumulated. The overdrawn accounts, the large, fabricated store bills, the supposed property tax arrears. I paid them all, in full, with cash, right there at the counter. The tellers, the people waiting in line, they all watched, their murmurs growing from whispers to outright gasps. The man they thought was broke, losing his ranch, was quietly, calmly paying off thousands of dollars with a stack of crisp bills. Mr. Jenkins just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reached his eyes. He didn't say a word, just counted the money. The news, I knew, would spread like wildfire through town. Will Harlan never lost the ranch. It was all a show. I stepped out of the bank, the sun warm on my face, and saw Bo Merton leaning against his truck, a wide grin spreading across his face. He pushed himself off the fender, walked over, and clapped me on the shoulder, a hard, friendly slap. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice low, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. "You always were 2 steps ahead, Will, always were." I just smiled, a small, private smile that felt good, like the setting sun after a long day. "Some things," I said, looking out at the town, at the people who were now staring at me with a new kind of understanding. "Some things are worth keeping safe." Bo just nodded, his grin widening. He knew, everyone knew now, and it felt like a heavy weight had lifted from my shoulders, replaced by the familiar strength of the land beneath my feet. Clara tried to sue. I knew she would. It was her last, desperate throw of the dice, a final attempt to claw something back from the wreckage she had made. The summons arrived, a stiff piece of paper from the county courthouse. It claimed she was owed a share, that I had defrauded her, that she deserved compensation for her contributions to the ranch. I just read it, folded it, and placed it on my desk. The courtroom was small, stuffy, filled with the hum of the old air conditioner. Clara sat across from me, her face tight, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. She wore a tailored suit, but it looked worn, like she'd been sleeping in it. Her lawyer, the one from Dallas, spoke in clipped, impatient tones, laying out her case, trying to make me out to be some kind of cruel manipulator. When it was her turn, Clara stood, her voice wavering at first, then growing shrill as she spoke about her lost hopes, her dreams of a life on the ranch. She even shed a few tears, but they didn't quite reach her eyes. The judge, an old man named Miller who knew me from cattle auctions, listened patiently, his face unreadable. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He was a quiet sort, like me, but sharp as a tack. He simply presented the facts, the carefully structured generational trust, the ironclad prenup she had signed before the wedding, a prenup she had barely glanced at, dismissing it as a formality. Her own signature, clear and undeniable, was on every page. The judge looked at Clara, his gaze direct. "Mrs. Harlan," he said, his voice calm, "did Mr. Harlan ever promise you anything in writing outside of these agreements? Did he ever, in any legally binding way, assure you a share of this property, beyond the terms of the trust you signed?" Clara stammered. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her lawyer, then back at the judge. "No," she finally whispered, so soft it was barely audible. No, Your Honor, not in writing. I just sat there, silent, watching. The judge nodded slowly, a quiet resolution in his eyes. Case dismissed, he said. Just like that. The gavel came down with a soft thud. Clara stared, disbelieving, then crumpled into her chair. Her lawyer packed up his papers, not looking at her. She had come for the land, armed with deceit, and left with nothing but the dust of her own failure. The courthouse verdict spread faster than a wildfire through dry pasture. She tried to take his land, people would say, shaking their heads. That good man, Will Harlan. And she tried to run off with his inheritance. The story grew, embellished with each retelling, until Clara's reputation in redemption was lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. People stopped talking to her. When she walked into the general store, the conversations would cease, replaced by a cold, thick silence. Store owners, who had once extended credit to her, now shook their heads, their faces grim. Cash only, ma'am, old Jimmy from the feed store said one afternoon, his voice flat. She tried to argue, to charm, but it was like speaking to stone. No one met her gaze. They just looked through her, as if she were made of smoke. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her car, the one she'd brought from the city, had broken down weeks ago. The money for repairs vanished. Her mare, the one she'd ridden away on, had been sold for a pittance to pay for a night's lodging in a dusty motel on the edge of town. She was stranded, without wheels, without allies. She tried calling friends, family, anyone who might help, but the word had spread even further than redemption. Nobody wanted to touch her. I stayed silent through it all. I didn't gloat. I didn't comment. When Beau or another neighbor mentioned her, I'd just nod, or change the subject to the weather or the price of cattle. There was no joy in her downfall, just the quiet satisfaction of justice. I saw her sometimes, walking the main street. Her shoulders slumped. Her once bright clothes faded and dusty. She looked smaller, shrunken. The confident polish was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry look. She would glance at me if she saw me, her eyes holding a mixture of fury and a strange, dawning understanding. She had played her hand and lost everything. And the town, they watched her, a silent jury, rendering their own, undeniable verdict. A few days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. The handwriting was hers, sprawling across the envelope, almost frantic. I could see the smudges, like she had cried over the paper. I knew what it would say, more or less. A plea, a desperate attempt to claw her way back in. Let's start again, Will, it probably begged. I was scared. We can fix this. I didn't open it. I walked it out to the burn barrel behind the barn, the one I used for old papers and dry leaves. The smell of smoke was already in the air from a small brush pile I'd cleaned up that morning. I lit a match, watched the flame lick along the edge of the envelope, then catch, curling the paper, turning the elegant script into ash. The words she'd written, whatever they were gone. Just smoke, vanishing into the wide, indifferent sky. The next day, she showed up at the ranch gate. I was out fixing a broken latch on the fence line near the main road. I saw her walking up the long drive, dusty, tired, her hair stringy, hanging around her face. She looked like a ghost or a refugee. Her clothes were rumpled, stained. The woman who had arrived with such polish and confidence was gone. This was just a shell. She stopped at the gate, her hands gripping the wire, her knuckles white. Her eyes met mine, and there was a desperate, pleading look in them I hadn't seen before. Will, she choked out, her voice hoarse. Please, I have nowhere to go. I looked at her, then past her, at the miles of open land, the green pastures, the distant hills, my land, the land she had tried to steal, to strip bare. I thought about Sarah, about my family, about every Harlan who had sweated and bled on this soil, and I thought about the trust, the unbreakable wall I had built around it. Clara, I said, my voice quiet, even. This land is for the honest. It always has been. It always will be. I paused, letting the words hang in the still air. Ride on. I didn't wait for her reply. I just turned back to the broken latch, my hands moving with practiced efficiency. I heard her gasp, a small, choked sound. Then, slowly, painfully, she turned and began walking back down the long, dusty drive. I didn't look up until I heard the distant, tired crunch of her shoes fading away. The gate, once a symbol of welcome, was now a final, insurmountable barrier. The weeks that followed Clara's final departure were quiet, filled with the familiar rhythms of ranch life. It was a comfortable quiet, like coming home after a long, difficult journey. One of the first things I did was fix the front gate. It wasn't truly broken, not in a structural sense, But the old sign, the one that had just said Harlan Ranch, had fallen down sometime during her stay. She hadn't bothered to put it back up. I found it leaning against the barn wall, a little weathered, but still solid. I took it down to the workshop, sanded it clean, then painted the letters fresh, a bold, simple black. When I rehung it, the morning light caught it just right, standing clear and proud at the entrance. It felt like putting the world back on its axis. Then I called Old Man Tucker and Billy. They answered the phone with a surprised hesitation, probably thinking I was going to ask them to haul something, or maybe just offering a friendly chat. "The jobs are open," I told them, plain and simple. "Same pay, same hours. You want them?" Old Man Tucker just grunted, a sound of profound relief. Billy, he let out a whoop. They were back the next morning, their trucks pulling in before dawn, and the ranch felt whole again. Their familiar routines, their easy banter, it was like the air itself had cleared. I bought a new mare, too, a young roan, spirited but calm, with eyes that looked at you with an honest curiosity. I named her Sarah, after my late wife, a quiet tribute to the woman who had truly loved this place, loved it for what it was, not what it could give her. We rode the pastures together, the new mare and I, checking the fences, pushing the cattle, feeling the land beneath us. There was so much to repair. Clara had let small things slide, things she deemed unimportant. A leaky roof on the south barn, a broken water pump out near the far pasture, a stretch of fence that was leaning precariously. I tackled them one by one, slowly, carefully, not rushing. Each repair felt like a small act of healing. It wasn't just the wood and the metal I was fixing. It was the land itself, shaking off the weight of what had happened. I was alone again. Yes, but it wasn't the hollow, aching loneliness I had known after Sarah died. This was different. This was a quiet strength, a sense of being unbroken. The ranch was mine again, truly mine, and it felt like it was finally breathing freely. The dust from Clara's departure settled, and with it, a new kind of calm began to spread over Redemption. It was as if the whole town had been holding its breath, and now, finally, they could exhale. The whispers about Clara faded, replaced by quiet nods of respect when I rode into town, or a wave from a passing truck. The judgment in their eyes had vanished, replaced by something familiar, something that felt like coming home. One Saturday morning, I was out by the south barn, the one Clara had let fall into disrepair. The roof sagged, and the paint was peeling like old skin. I had a long list of repairs, more than one man could manage alone. As I was pulling down a rotten beam, a truck pulled up, then another, and another. Soon, a small crowd of men, and a few women, too, stood by the barn, some carrying tools, some with thermoses of coffee. Bo Merton was at the front, his hands on his hips, a familiar grin on his face. "Figured you could use a hand, Will," he said, his eyes twinkling. "This old barn's seen better days, and we got nothing better to do." They worked all day, without a word of complaint. Men I'd known my whole life. Their sons, even a few of their grandsons, swinging hammers, hauling lumber, laughing. The barn, which had felt like an insurmountable task, was taking shape again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery streaks, a neighbor's daughter, a girl named Sarah Beth, who wasn't much older than my own Sarah would have been, came by with a basket. "Ma sent pies," she said, her voice shy, "just to check on Mr. Harlan." She started coming weekly after that, always with a fresh pie or a plate of cookies. We'd sit on the porch, more with my coffee, her with her lemonade, and talk about the weather or the local rodeo. I started sharing coffee with them too, leaning against the fence after a long day's work, telling stories of the old days, of my grandpa and the early ranch. My silence, the one that had weighed me down for so long,